Chapter 1. The 10 Commandments of Clubbing Holidays. The coppers in green are cunts. Don't mess with them because they'll beat the fuck out of you, or even worse. The self-important 20s rep stood sweating at the front of the hotel transfer bus, addressing his captive audience of new arrivals. Ever since we'd boarded the coach an hour ago, he'd trundled out a tiring tirade of know-all Ibiza insider info to over 100 exhausted ears. Where to drink, where not to drink, where to club, where not to club, to not miss the bar crawl and Reps Cabaret, all of which could be booked at the welcome meeting tomorrow morning at 10 a.m, prompting someone to vocalise everyone's feeling. 10 o'clock in the fucking morning? We're on holiday! You're having a bleeding laugh, fatty! A group of lads at the front erupted in laughter. For a brief moment, everyone saw through the branded tour operator t-shirt and beyond the sweat-soaked forehead and caught a glimpse of Gary Smithick from West Bromwich, who, due to his likeness to Lou Costello, the short, rotund one in Abbott and Costello, was known as Little Louis, though he would tell any guest that he was named after DJ Little Louis Vega. But Gary wasn't so much a master at work as a masturbator at work, pleasuring himself with endless ejaculations from a tiny microphone that his pink, fat fingers wrapped themselves around like cheap Richmond sausages. Gary wiped the sweat from his brow. His status hung in the balance, and he knew it. Losers now, and it would be a long and fruitless week. He needed to act. He searched for salvation, and it was duly delivered. As the bus crawled forward in heavy traffic, they drew alongside a green and white VW van with the words Guardia Civil. Next to it, a group of broad-shouldered men in uniforms surrounded a skinny scooter rider in a white space singlet but no helmet. One policeman drew a baton and thwacked the lad at the back of the legs, causing him to collapse in a heap. Gary seized the moment. The coppers in green are the Guardia Civil, the civil guard. They aren't from round here. They're from the mainland, see? So they don't know anyone and can't be bribed to persuaded to turn a blind eye like the local coppers can. None of them speak a word of English. At least that's what they'll tell you. So they communicate with the batons. If you give them any shit, they'll take you in. And that's when the fun really starts. By now, the entire coach were swivelling their heads back and forth from the military-style police contingent outside to Gary and back again like a centre court crowd following a long baseline rally. Don't give them any lip, because they'll beat the fuck out of you. Or even worse. What could be worse than being beaten the fuck out of? One lad in an Arsenal shirt asked under his breath, prompting more sniggers. Upon hearing this, Gary walked a few paces down the central aisle until he was adjacent to the lad who provided his cue. At full stretch, the normally curly microphone lead ran to the dashboard resembling a tightrope, taut and strained. Like a dog straining at his leash, the fat, sweaty rep knew this was the limit of his influence and the last chance to assert his authority. Otherwise it would be a long week. Allow me to explain. The coach fell silent. They're all nasty fuckers. But there's one particular nasty fucker called Carlos, who's bald as a coot with a big handlebar moustache. And Carlos just loves to shove his baton where the sun don't shine. And I don't mean Scunthorpe. Upon hearing this, a girl opposite me, who'd been feeling unwell for some time, retched, vomit spewing out from between her fingers as they cupped her mouth. They tell the hospital that the poor buggers resisted arrest. He paused to make the quote-unquote gesture with both hands, momentarily relaxing his sausage-like grip on the mic, which darted out of his hand like a crossbow bolt, hitting the windscreen of the coach with a crack, narrowly missing the driver, who shook his head resignedly. Although his English wasn't good, he sensed Gary was a tit. The only Spanish words he'd heard from his mouth were, "Vamos, señor," whenever he closed the bus doors. He'd also noticed at the end of each week, departing guests wouldn't give him the same warmth or respect they showed to other reps. Sorry about that. I'm lethal with a mic, me. You have been warned. Now then, where was I? Oh yeah, a Geordie lad last week was admitted to Canmis's Hospital with a ruptured rectum after a date night with Carlos. Gary crouched in the aisle and addressed the lad in the nearest seat to ask the question. Now, that's worse than being beaten, isn't it? The lad, like his mates, stared ahead. The blood drained from their faces as they wondered if they'd perhaps landed in Feltham Young Offenders Institute by mistake. Gary jumped up again, his sense of authority restored. Next hotel, the Breezer. Make sure you take all your personal belongings from the coach. If you leave your passport on the bus, don't expect to get it back. Not for free, at least. Welcome to the jungle. This was my first taste of a package holiday in Ibiza. I'd booked a last-minute 20s holiday for £159 a person, including flights, transfers and accommodation in August 1997, as it was the cheapest way I could spend a week on the island promoting my white label, a reworking of the subliminal cut piano house classic Le Voir le Soleil, with a soaring vocal hook added, and invited my mate Martin, who was going through some choppy waters, a much-needed break to join me. My track didn't go far, but as so often in my life, and yours too if you stop and think about it, it opened the door to another path. It was while on this god-awful bus, which had taken over an hour to reach my hotel from the airport just 10 miles away, that I first caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a gap in the package holiday market, a visible void in vacationing. We eventually emerged pasty-faced and dehydrated from the bus, like those mobile cattle crates you sometimes see on motorways, and we stumbled into our hotel, where we had to wait for another half an hour to check in, because Gary was too interested in chatting up two girls from Rill rather than helping the poor receptionist by asking everyone to get their passports ready and asking some to wait in the adjacent bar area. First night madness. The first night on holiday is always the wildest. When that suitcase is opened, all the problems, stresses, frustrations and tensions from back home burst out like a bunch of demented butterflies. With pockets bulging and adventure beckoning, there's little consideration of tomorrow. This is what you've been waiting for all those months. No matter how tired you are from the red-eye flight or how little you've eaten, with no regard for hydration or pacing yourself, you hit the town like a drone strike hits a jihadi jeep. Bang! Although it's light when you get to bed, the sun's not quite visible, which is just as well, as it'd dazzle you with its brightness, highlighting last night's souvenirs scored on your skin. The cigarette burn from the girl dancing too close in play 2. The singed eyebrow from the flaming sambuca you spilled in coppers. And the bruised toe from that security wanker who deliberately stamped on your foot when you finally left that downstairs dive bar where the girls walked around with their tits out. West End warriors battle scars you wear with pride for the rest of the week. You fall into the bed wearing the shorts stained with garlic mayo from the kebab you dropped onto your lap as you sat on the fountains and fell asleep. At least you hope it's garlic mayo. There was a grope in the doorway with some Scottish bird, but after the amount you'd drunk, an erection was out of the question, let alone ejaculation. You hope. Just as you drift off, you can hear a distant hammering. You think it's someone doing DIY, but then you hear your name being called. You rise and stagger to the door, dragging your aching body like a stylized somnambulist. After struggling to unlock it, you realise it wasn't locked in the first place, and pull it open. Welcome meeting is in 10 minutes downstairs. This is your only chance to book the bar crawl and cabaret. Gary's face looks wider than ever, a pink, fleshy satellite dish from which two piggy eyes surveyed the wreckage. Without replying, you slam the door shut, and through the door hear, "Be there or be square," as his trainers squeak down the corridor. Back in your bed, you could hear Gary knock on other doors, an unwelcome prison officer announcing slopping out time. His rapping solicited one of two responses: complete silence or "fuck off." At least this was my experience. By programming a welcome meeting before midday after the first night out, it showed that either the tour operators didn't understand their guests or treated them with disdain. I pulled out the folded 20s booking confirmation from my trouser pocket. On the reverse, I'd scrawled, "The 10 Commandments of Clubbing Holidays." I'd started on the bus the previous day, which already stated the first two. 1. No multi-drop hotel transfers taking more than 1 hour. 2. No mention of buggery with battens. I now added a third. 3. No welcome meetings before 1 p.m. Throughout the week, the Jack the Lad reps would waltz past us in the lobby, inflated by their sense of self-importance. Each rendezvous was seen as an opportunity to upsell an excursion, bar crawl, drinking games, a glass-bottom boat tour, or the inevitable ride on an inflatable plastic banana which was being towed by a speedboat. Second only to the undoubted highlight of the week, the wet t-shirt contest. Girls were cajoled into entering, and any hesitancy to do so was met with derision, prompting more notes. 4. Don't treat guests as sex objects. And 5. Treat all guests the same, regardless of how attractive they may be. Although we were in Ibiza at the height of the 90s clubbing boom, the reps acted like we were in Benidorm or Torremolinos in 1983. The only club I can recall them recommending was UFO, which was on a Monday at Es Paradis. Now, this had a half-decent lineup and took place in a unique setting, but in the late 90s, Monday in Ibiza was manumission. The world's biggest club night, in the world's biggest club, attracting around 10,000 people each week and featuring a random interactive performance element. It embodied Ibiza. Their infamous sex show led to British tour operators eschewing the night. Well, that's what they said. In reality, the amount of commission a rep could make on a manumission ticket was less than half they could make on a ticket for UFO. So while one night was talked down, they slaughtered a goat on stage last week. Someone caught VD from the toilet seat. The other was talked up and promoted the hell out of, simply because it paid them more commission. I pulled out a pen and wrote, 6. Always offer the best parties. 7. Don't be influenced by commission. I was dismayed at how much contempt they showed to their guests, who they clearly saw as nothing more than pockets full of money and panties full of pussy. When their fun was interrupted by someone requesting some help in changing the room or how to report a theft, they would simply employ evasion tactics with the expertise of a politician. If the guest persisted and wanted to complain, they would agree to a 9 o'clock meeting the following morning, knowing that 9 times out of 10, the guests wouldn't want to sacrifice a night off their holiday for a meeting about a balcony facing a dusty car park rather than a glistening ocean. The reps would always turn up, spend 15 minutes routinely going through next week's rooming list with the hotel management, before leaving with a knowing glint in their eye. After their no-show, the guest and their complaint were not seen again until departure day, when they would sheepishly board the coach to the airport, their name ticked off the list by the triumphant rep with a "See you next year, lads." Like Nazi stormtroopers or coppers at a demo, they were only following orders. And just like Nazi stormtroopers or coppers at a demo, this was no excuse for their actions. The reps' training began when they were taken to the airport shortly after arriving in Ibiza for the summer season. Resort manager Jamie was a fast-talking Scouser who came from a family of car thieves, shoplifters and drug dealers. "I'm the black sheep of the family, the only one to make an honest living," he'd tell people, before adding, "Well, honest-ish." He'd risen through the ranks using guile, ambition and some incriminating Polaroids of a private party with a previous resort manager, and as a result now ran San. If this was a military movie, Scouse Jamie was the crew-cut sporting, lean, mean, regimental sergeant major whose job was to knock the motley crew he was presented with into shape, transforming them into a smarmy army of pocket-picking suntan salesmen who personified the company whose logo was emblazoned across their chest. Fun, frivolous, flirty, and 5 years behind the curve in terms of what was cool, hip, and happening. I could imagine the rep's first day of the summer season was spent meeting with the first 20s guests of the summer at the airport. Standing on the viewing terrace with a complimentary drink, in front of a dozen new uniformed reps, Jamie had just finished outlining the golden rules of engagement with the guests. "And finally, never ever ask them if everything's okay, or if they're enjoying their holiday. That's just asking for trouble. Keep it to a nod or a smile, unless you're selling something. Or just keep walking by. This goes for the cute ones too. If you have to shag them, do it later in the week, or they'll be on your case for the rest of their stay. And always wear a Johnny. Or better still, get Harry on the boat, as we say out here. They can't get pregnant that way." Footnote: Cockney rhyming slang for ejaculation, spunk, Harry Monk, on the boat race, face, and title of former Club 1830 rep Colin Butt's book and TV series is Harry on the Boat. A plane appeared in the blue sky above Jamie's right shoulder, which grew larger. He checked his fake Rolex. "Fucking great! Bang on time! The pilot must need a shite. Here's the first week arrivals. Let's watch 'em disembark." 10 minutes later, a Boeing 737 with 20s written along the fuselage came to a stop around 100 metres away from the viewing terrace. A stairway was attached to the front door and the passengers began to leave the aircraft. Jamie gestured for the new reps to crowd round and passed a pair of binoculars from a box to Gary Smithick from West Bromwich. "What do you see, son? Describe it for everyone." Jamie insisted. Gary closed one eye, then the other. He'd never used binoculars before and couldn't see anything. With one eye open, he glanced to the side of the lens pressed up against his face and stated definitively, "People are leaving the aircraft." "No shit, Shylock. What kind of people?" "Guests." "Whose guests?" "20s guests." "They're your bloody guests, Gary. Now, take the lens cap off and it might help." This prompted laughter all around, only serving to increase Gary's stress. Jamie removed the lens cap and handed the eyeglasses back to him. "Now you're cooking with gas. What are your guests carrying?" Gary could now make out blurred shapes, which sharpened as he twisted the centre dial. Rucksacks. Some have got these small suitcases, one or two what look like stereos. Jamie, growing impatient, said, Yes, yes, but what's in their pockets? He made a circular motion with his right hand, the gesticulation of impatience. Gary turned the dial on the binoculars to get a close-up of their pockets without success. I can't see. They keep moving. Jamie shook his head in comic despair. Great, they're alive then. Have a guess, Gary. Wallets, keys, passports? Now we're getting there. What else is in their wallets, Gary? Gary, still frantically twisting the focus in an attempt to see into their wallets, unconvincingly stuttered. Credit cards? Driving licence? Organ donor card, maybe? Organ fucking donor card? Anything else? Jamie was now in full patronising mode. Gary felt the veins in his temple pulsing. A photo of their mum? Jamie snapped, grabbed the binoculars from Gary and presented them instead to the rep standing next to him. Paul, please help Gary. What do people carry in their wallets? But before Paul could answer, Gary had his eureka moment and blurted out, Got it! Cash! Scouse Jamie grasped Gary's shoulders with both hands and stared into his eyes, his forehead only inches away from the other with an intense stare, and proudly proclaimed, You may make a rep yet, Gary. Then, with a cheesy Chris Tarrant accent, he calmly asked, For £1 million, Gary, whose cash is in their wallet? Gary paused, and lacking conviction, eventually muttered, Theirs? Jamie threw his head back in exaggerated anguish, eyes tightly closed as if willing Gary on. Is that your final answer? Final answer, Gary? His voice began to rise in intensity. Yes. Jamie released him in disgust, almost pushing him away like a lover rejecting the advances of a cheating partner. Let's ask the audience. Anyone! Whose cash is in their wallets? After 10 seconds, which saw Jamie pace up and down, exasperated at the increasing silence, he paused, turned to face his audience, and, holding his hands out like Christ the Redeemer in Rio, bellowed, Yours! They got your wages in their wallets, and it's your job to take it from them. He then moved among the intake of reps, addressing each one with a sentence or two, before moving on to the next. His knowledge works his way through them like a virus, unseen and undeniable. Ask any bar owner in San An who are the best guests, and they'll all tell you it's the Brits. Sure, the eye ties look flash, but 4 of them will share 2 cups of cappuccino, making it last an hour as you sit on the best pavement table, dripping in their posy designer threads. The Spanish ain't got any money, and the Germans don't leave Playa than Bossa. We're the only drinking German bars anyway. But a Brit saves up all year for his beef blowout. He'll arrive with a bulging wallet and treat his cash like monopoly money, 'cause it's not real if it ain't got a madge on, right? He continued. If he's got any notes left by the time he gets home, he considers it a wasted opportunity. Holiday money literally burns a hole in their pockets. So, what they arrive with, they spend. They call it spending money for a reason. That's why your job is easier than selling double frigging glazing. Your guests actually want to spend their money. It's just a case of whether you get it, or the lap dancers on their last night do. Or, if they don't make it out on the last night because they haven't drank any water since they arrived and are on a dripping Galeno, he'll leave it with a fucking patcher shop at the airport. His tour complete, he returned to the front, adding, The existence of which is proof, if any was needed, Gary, of me truth. Taking back the binoculars, he stepped back and opened his arms like an opera singer, exulting nose gathered in a climatic call and response. Where are your wages? In their wallets, came a mumbled, staggered response. I said, where are your wages? In their wallets. Where?
In their wallets! In their wallets! In their wallets!
Their eyes burned with fire as they clapped their hands and chanted. They were now engaged and energised and filled with the spirit of all-inclusive bars, standing erect like a nipple in a wet T-shirt while possessing the vision of a glass-bottomed boat in a sandy, turquoise bay. Jamie nodded in acknowledgement. Now they were ready for work. He walked through them like the Messiah who'd just shown them the light, calling them to follow him to Arrival's Lounge to meet their prey. Guests. Come on, it's payday! For the first time in his life, Gary Smithick felt like a hunter rather than its prey. However, he failed to relieve me of any money. I booked no excursions, rode no jeeps, crawled no bars, ogled no nipples, and straddled no inflatable bananas. By Friday, Gary had given up, and instead of hassling me over my full English in the hotel cafe bar, he shook his head solemnly and uttered, Very disappointing, Mr. Field, very disappointing. Like a teacher who could see the obvious potential in a pupil ebb away in a series of detentions and dubious friendship groups. The week ended with me being knocked awake once again by a uniformed frown with a clipboard. "Bus to the airport's outside. Everyone's waiting for you." The blonde in the 20s shirt spat in a West Yorkshire accent. After repeatedly trying to sell me excursions and failing, they had no interest in me other than getting me off the island as soon as they could. Through squinting eyes, I muttered, "The plane leaves at 9:30. What time is it?" 6:15 a.m, as stated downstairs on the notice board. "You have to be there 2 hours before the plane leaves, and it'll take the best part of an hour to pick everyone up from all the hotels, especially if they're all naked." Her disgusted gaze lowered to the towel I'd thrown hastily around myself to open the door. In my haste to answer it, I'd made the schoolboy error of grabbing a hand towel rather than a larger one. The lack of material meant I was unable to fold the two sides together, so I held them together with my left hand, except there was a small gap between which my post-pill penis peeked out, like a bashful button mushroom between two white curtains. "Not very impressed, Mr. Field. We'll wait for 10 minutes and 10 minutes only." I'd had enough. I knew Ibiza had a small airport, which was swift to navigate, and this was more about vacating rooms, allowing them to be cleaned and absolving themselves of responsibility, as once a guest go through security, they're no longer the responsibility of the resort staff. I didn't know this at the time, however, but I did know that I didn't need to leave my bed 3.5 hours before my flight left, especially had I only got into it 20 minutes beforehand. I'll make my own way to the airport. I must advise that if you choose to make your own way there, you must understand we are not responsible should you miss your flight. I slammed the door. Was I her guest or her prisoner? I found a pen. 8. No reps uniforms. Staff will wear branded t-shirts only. I managed another hour snoozing, ate breakfast downstairs and asked the receptionist to call a cab. We still managed to arrive at the airport at exactly the same time as the 20s bus. My cheery wave at the blonde rep was met with an icy stare and a frown, which was directed at my groin area, followed by a shake of the head. After checking in, I sought out the head rep, who stood with the blonde rep, and graciously thanked them for showing me how not to do a package holiday. "You're welcome, pal. See you next year." His response showed he wasn't listening, and only reinforced my belief that if ever I decided to work in travel, I could do better. A lot better. At a departure gate, I made a note. 9. Don't assume there is no competition or take your guests for granted. On the plane home, I added another. 10. Never comment on the size or state of a guest's genitals, no matter how large, small, or shriveled they may be. And just like that, I had my 10 commandments. No climbing mountains or heavy slabs to carry. Afterglow. Although my white label was played in privilege by John Please Women and received some support from big names, I couldn't afford to press up the 500 copies needed to get a nationwide reaction or a position in the Mixmag Buzz chart. Go to www.ravenewworld.co.uk if you want to hear it. Top tune, Belo Horizonte, The Heartists. Original mix, VC Recordings. Behind the brochure. A few years ago, I organised an Ibiza package for a club brand who attracted a large group of ravers from the north of England, a surprising number of whom hadn't previously left the UK. Now, this is always a worry. Culturally naive and unused to international travel, they're more likely to become incapacitated by drink, as they aren't used to the generous Spanish measures and the local brands used in some bars, be involved in a road accident, as they don't look left instead of right when crossing the road, or lose their passports, as they've never had to take care of one before. One such case involved a first-timer called Jade, who I'd noticed was a little worse for wear when checking in, as many guests are, having started their holiday the night before at the airport. She called me in a panic. I asked her to check everywhere again and then report it, lost and stolen, and apply to the British consulate in Ibiza town for an ETD, an emergency travel document, to enable her to return home. This would cost her £100 for the paperwork and £100 in a taxi, money she just didn't have. We urged her to borrow some from a friend or relative or face being stranded in Ibiza. Advice she ignored. She was adamant it would turn up, and if it didn't, mistakenly believed the airline wouldn't just leave her in Ibiza, as she had photo ID. She'd show them her Facebook page. On the morning of her departure, Jade messaged me. She'd remembered she'd put it in the safety deposit box in her room when she first checked in, as we advised our guests to do so, but she couldn't remember the code. I told her to ask the hotel receptionist, who'd be able to help. 10 minutes elapsed before she called again, blubbering that someone must have taken it as the safety deposit box was empty. Jade travelled to the airport and, as expected, was refused boarding and was making a nuisance of herself at the check-in desk. It was at this point the hotel called me to say they'd found her passport in her room. It was in the microwave.